Good morning. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. May we have the roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Bofi?
Present.
Dr. Bofi is present. Mr. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Davis is present. Ms. Edmonston? Mr. Garvey? Mr. Garvey is present. Ms. Holloway? Present. Ms. Holloway is present. Dr. Jones?
Present.
Dr. Jones is present. Ms. Lewis? Present. Ms. Lewis is present. Ms. Orange Jones is not here. Mr. Rock?
Present.
Mr. Rock is present. Dr. Thomason?
Present.
Dr. Thomason is present. Ms. Vautier?
Here.
Ms. Vautier is present. And Mr. Benoit Naquin?
Present.
Mr. Benoit Naquin is present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. I understand that we need to update the agenda. Is that what you'd like to do first?
Yes.
Okay. Hang on.
Okay, I'm sorry, my assistant was a little lax. Okay, we are going to amend the agenda. We have had a request from the executive director to make technical edits to item 3.1. The technical edit will be removing the Bulletin 1706 reference in the title of the agenda, and we'll be breaking out those bulletins in A, B, and C order. Bulletin 1706, Bulletin 741, and Bulletin 1530. I need to say that RS 4219 requires that we have unanimous approval of members present to amend the agenda, and we need a motion to amend the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion by Mr. Davis and a second by Ms. Holloway. Is there any objection to amending the agenda? Hearing none, motion carries.
Okay, and now we will take public comments. If anyone has a public comment on the motion to amend the agenda.
Hearing
Okay.
none.
No comments on that, so we will take a roll call vote to amend the agenda to remove 1706 from the title and break out into ABC.
Do we need a roll call if there was
Yes.
no? Okay.
The statute requires us to do roll call, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Dr. Bofi?
Yes.
Dr. Bofi votes yes. Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Davis votes yes. Ms. Edmonston is not in attendance. Mr. Garvey? Mr. Garvey votes yes. Ms. Holloway?
Yes.
Ms. Holloway votes yes. Dr. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Jones votes yes. Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis votes yes. Ms. Orange Jones is not in attendance. Mr. Rock?
Yes.
Mr. Rock votes yes. Dr. Thomason?
Yes.
Dr. Thomason votes yes. Ms. Vautier?
Yes.
Ms. Vautier votes yes. The motion passes unanimously. The agenda has been amended as referenced, and you may now proceed.
Thanks. What's our next item?
Your first item is on page 1, item 2.1. It was formerly on consent. It is now on the floor. Consideration of policy changes and waivers required as a result of the recent federally declared disaster, Louisiana severe storms and flooding, DR 4277. Updated documentation has been distributed. The department recommendation is to ratify numbers 1 through 8 and to approve as notice of intent number 9, revisions to Bulletin 126, Charter Schools.
Is there a motion? Thank you, Mr. Garvey. A second? Thank you, Mr. Davis. Yes, Superintendent.
Members, this is obviously an issue of critical importance, and I'd like to provide just a little bit of context. I want to also thank the many members who have been involved in discussions related to the floods. And I want to commend our superintendents from Livingston Parish and from Ascension Parish, both of whom are new in their jobs and have gone above and beyond in their roles to get their schools and their communities and their students to this point. They are in attendance today, and I thank you, gentlemen, for the great service that you've done to your communities and to our state, and I thank you for being here today. This is a package of policies that in the immediate aftermath of the floods, we asked the BESE president to approve on a tentative basis that now must come to you. These policies are any aspect of BESE regulation, or the bulletins, that needed to be waived in order for schools to successfully get back up and running in the immediate aftermath. And so I say that to you to distinguish between these things that BESE can waive in the immediate aftermath, and then any changes that we should make in the long run. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. Therefore, what you have in front of you are waivers on issues such as operation of school transportation specifications. For example, the age of buses is something that is contemplated in our regulations. These are the kinds of issues that obviously in the aftermath of this kind of a disaster we can't quibble about, and so we ask that you waive this issue. There are other issues regarding class sizes, operations of the scholarship program, ratios in early childhood environments, issues such as the chronological age span among students with disabilities who can be in a specific room. Essentially, the schools, as the superintendents can testify, have had to make extraordinary adjustments, and fitting within the neat boxes of our regulations could not always be accommodated. Therefore, we are asking that you waive them in these cases. I should also note that these do not just cover the school systems that were affected by the floods, but also child care centers and Head Start centers, which you also regulate and oversee, and certain regulations we waived at the time and are asking for your ratification of that waiver now. There's a longer term set of concerns that were not, however, about getting schools just back up and running, and I do want to differentiate between these immediate regulatory changes and long-term changes. And that largely necessitates academic issues and funding issues. We have just taken a count of the students and the student displacement that happened from one place to the next as a result of the flooding. Final results will be back from that likely this week, but early indications are that there has been more dislocation in some parishes than in others, probably not as much as we had expected in the two parishes reflected here today, which is a testament to these gentlemen's efforts. But nevertheless, more in some parishes than in others, not overall as much as we might have expected. That means, though, that we're going to have to consider, in concert with the legislature and the governor's office, whether there are funding provisions that need to be made to accommodate for any of the hardships in these districts, and whether there are any academic policy changes in the long run that we should contemplate related to the floods. Beth Ciano on my staff is leading a task force, and I thank Superintendent Lejeune from Jeff Davis Parish who made this recommendation, related specifically to those kind of more long-term policies. Also, Superintendent Boche, Superintendent Falk, and I met on the phone with Scott Richard and others last week to discuss how we can take the MFP task force and make the MFP task force also a venue in which these issues are discussed more publicly. So both a specific task force and the MFP task force will be addressing the financial and enrollment issues long term. This is a waiver that's already in place for the short term. We're asking simply that you ratify it because Mr. Garvey used his interim authority to get the regulatory changes done. And I appreciate your consideration of it. Thank you.
Members, do you have any initial comments? Mr. Garvey?
Yes, I have two. When I signed these, and when I've taken similar action in between BESE meetings, I've tried to make sure that all the BESE members were notified the same day that I took the actions. I don't think that that's required in the policy or the regulations, and I think it ought to be. That within some short period of time, within 24 hours of a BESE president taking action in between BESE meetings, that the rest of the BESE members be notified by email or some sort of notification. And I'd like to ask our staff to look at that issue and maybe come back with a recommendation for changing our policy on that. Shan seems to be agreeing, so I don't think we need a motion on that. But another issue I had was, if I remember right, and maybe I read the papers wrong, but I thought that there was a request for a waiver of some of the record keeping data, and my impression was that it was some computer files that got lost, some student data stored on computer files in one of the parishes, and I would have thought that sensitive student data stored on computers would have been backed up off-site, either at a location out of state or in the cloud or something like that, and I'm wondering why would it not be that case? And Superintendent, would you know, do our LEAs generally back up the important student data off-site?
Yes, they have. And by the way, I should have acknowledged, I see Michelle there, I should have acknowledged the East Baton Rouge team is here as well, so thank you for being here as well. All school systems have vendors that provide both remote and cloud-based storage. I don't know, and Aaron, you may be able to provide me with more specifics as to this particular policy issue, but I have no doubt that school systems, with their student information system vendors and charter schools, are using an electronic storage system. Is there more that I need to know?
Mr. Garvey, are you referring to the one under number 3 that talks about the cumulative records of students?
I'm not really sure.
Okay.
As I said, I was under the impression that some computer data was lost, and a request was being asked for a waiver of the requirement to maintain the student data, and I was wondering why it was not stored off-site,
Ms.
thereby
Findley?
preventing such a loss.
And you're correct. It is under number 3, section 703 on student records. That is the policy that only EBR requested a waiver from, just because they did have some damage to their record-keeping system. I believe they do have representatives here to speak to that if you would like for them to. We did relay the message that you would like additional information about your plans to make sure that they have protections in place to make sure that that doesn't occur again in the future.
I would feel better about waiving it if I know that some actions are being taken to make sure it doesn't happen again. So if they're here, that would be great.
Good morning. Michelle Clayton, Deputy Superintendent for the East Baton Rouge Parish School System. Really, the waiver request that we submitted was for the permanent student record that had all the signatures and was considered the official record. We are actually able to reproduce, we do have electronic copies of every document that's in a child's Q folder. However, they may not be the original signed documents. For example, the State Department of Education will often come and do an audit, and they're looking for the hard copy that was signed by all parties on that specified date, say a 504 plan, an IEP, those kinds of things. We can pull those records out of SIR and different databases. However, it's going to take a while for us to reconvene all of those meetings to make sure that we have the appropriate signatures by all parties. And some of those things were historic documents that we can't go back and recreate. Any number of things could have occurred that would not allow those parties to come back to the table and sign the document as it was previously, as it existed prior to the flood. So we're just trying to make sure that we're covered with a waiver for any of those documents that cannot be remediated. We are handing out kind of a packet that shows the schools that were impacted by the flood on the first page, and you'll note it's Brookstown Middle. We have a couple of administrative sites, but there are 8 schools that exist on that list that were impacted by the flood. And as you look through the packet, you'll see the volume of student records. We actually have gone through every building and assessed the damage and taken pictures, and you'll see pictures in the packet of every school site and what we found when we went there and where the water level was. We've sent all those documents to be remediated. We've hired a company what they've told us is where the ink is smeared, to the extent that they can remediate the document, it may not be a usable document at the point we receive it back. And so that was our concern, just to ensure that we would not be held liable for that original signed document should the state come to audit some of those documents for the flooded schools.
Okay, so it sounds like the impression I had was wrong, that you have electronic backup copies of all your electronic data. And
Absolutely.
it was hard copies that were lost.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, glad we got that cleared up. Sounds a lot better now. Yes?
Yes, Mr. Jones?
I just, as a former superintendent, I'd like to add a little bit to that for you, Mr. Garvey. School districts on hard copy items like that, scan those items in, not every day. Sometimes they do it once a year, for example. And they actually have a trailer that comes by and a scanning system set up on it. So all those IEP records and all those things get scanned in once a year. You have electronic document of it after that point, but until that point, the original document is what's in the file at the school. So when it gets damaged, essentially they're in the process now of going back and reconstructing those hard copy documents that go to it. I didn't want to give the impression that school districts don't typically keep those records. It's a massive process to scan all those records in.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We need to make sure that you guys fill out a comment card, please. You got it? Thank you. All right, board members, I'm going to go ahead and go to public comment now, and then I can take any other questions that you have if some arise. Ms. Debbie Moe with LAE.
Debbie Moe, representing the Louisiana Association of Educators. First of all, I do want to thank all of our superintendents in our flood-affected areas, both in the spring and this past August, for making sure that our children were able to be educated in a timely manner and getting things up and going for them very quickly. And I think that also our governor deserves some praise for that as well. He's had a very good hand in making sure that our school system has been taken care of, as well as our citizens. I do hope that in the coming months, that as these schools are remediated and do come back online, that we will help to facilitate them moving back into the public schools that they may have left. I know that some families have moved out of the areas in which they were living, but some of them are remediating their homes, and I hope that we can find the funding that's necessary to make sure that these schools are up and running for those students and those community members and parents who want their children back in the original schools from which they were actually displaced. Thank you very much.
Board members, do you have any other questions or comments? Do you have any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 20.
Okay, I just need clarification. There was a second part to that item about approval as a notice of intent revisions to Bulletin 126. Was that part of that original motion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Your next item is on page 20, item 3.1, consideration of requests from local education agencies for waiver of policy contained in bulletins as submitted by the State Superintendent of Education. Updated documentation was distributed. The department recommendation is to approve.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
I hear a motion from Dr. Jones and a second from Ms. Foche. Superintendent White, would you like to provide context?
Thank you. Members, these are specific waiver requests that were submitted by Ascension Parish, Tangipahoa Parish, and St. Mary Parish regarding the student-to-teacher ratios or class sizes in specific services related to, in many cases, gifted and talented services. This is a fairly common request to add students to particular services, including electives and gifted classes. Our recommendation is that you grant for these school systems these waivers. Thank you.
We have a comment, Ms. Barrios.
Barrios, retired teacher from St. Tammany. I just want to express some of the same concerns that have been expressed before when these waivers are considered. And as you said, most of these are for gifted and talented. One of the stipulations is that the services, quality services for these students have to be maintained. And as a former teacher of gifted students, I know how difficult it would be for some of these waivers to be given. I see talented theater, one teacher given 34 students in 11 schools. How is that even possible? In another parish, talented visual arts, one teacher, 38 students in 9 schools. Another teacher, 48 students in 9 schools. I also have concerns, and I know some of the BESE members in the past have expressed those, on the reporting of how these services are being maintained. What reporting is required when these schools are given waivers? How often? What is reporting? How long is the waiver for? And at what point are these schools going to be required to go back to state policy, or as Superintendent White has suggested in some of the flood waivers, is it really BESE's intent or the department's intent to go back and change policy, which would not be beneficial for the students? So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to clarify for the audience, the staff is projecting the amount of time for the public comment, so our computers are not about to shut down. It just lets you know how much time you have left. Okay. Ms. Moe? Wait. Okay. So she opposes this recommendation but does not wish to speak. Thank you. Board members? Yes, Dr. Jones.
And I may be wrong, but my memory is that these waivers like this are typically for a one-year period or for the remainder of the school year in place. So in answer to Ms. Barrios' question there, these are not permanent waivers or long-term waivers. My understanding is they only go through the remainder of that school year and would have to be applied for again the following year. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
That's right.
Other board members? No. Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 30. Item 4.1, consideration of the authorization of a new course provider for the course choice program. The department recommendation is to approve.
Is there a motion? We have a motion by Mr. Garvey. We need a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Thomason. Superintendent White, would you like to provide a context?
Yes, please. Members, as you know, this is a program that's authorized in state law whereby entities can apply to provide courses to children. The money is in the MFP. It goes to school systems that then use that money on a per-child basis to work with families to select the appropriate course. We are proposing today that you approve one provider. You've done this before. A couple of months back, you approved 3 providers. We have a rolling process where when applicants come to us, we consider them on a rolling basis. Today's application is the Florida Virtual School. While most course choice courses are provided face-to-face, the Florida Virtual School is, as it says, an online school. It actually was the original kind of national name brand, started in Florida earlier in the 2000s, and has provided courses in Louisiana for many years. We're asking you to approve the Florida Virtual School. If school systems then wish to select those courses, they may do so.
Thank you. Ms. Barrios? Ms. Edmondson, do you have a question?
Could I possibly ask a question before I was trying to do
Sure.
it while she was walking down. But Superintendent, the rolling applications, can you just kind of explain that? That's just, we can accept an applicant for course choice in the middle of the year as opposed to at the beginning of the school year?
Yeah, so for example, in June, you approved a career and technical education
Right.
provider. For charter schools, we tend to take these applications, one date, you vote on all of them at one meeting. We've realized that that puts people in a difficult position when it comes to these type of organizations. If they want to apply in June, they should be able to apply in June, September. So it's just a rolling basis. And I think you can imagine every once in a while we will bring a proposed provider.
I think Ms. Edmondson might be asking when the course would be available to students.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that wasn't, but that's a good point. But I'm just wondering, would that cause any extra havoc for kids, for the students?
They're selecting it, so it's not like it's forced on
Okay.
anyone. I would imagine if we approve here, these courses will be available for the second semester.
Okay. So it won't be like something happening, in the middle
No,
of everything.
no.
Okay, that's what I was wondering about. Thank you.
Ms. Moe, would you like to go ahead and walk down? Okay. Ms. Barrios.
So I want to give, I would hope that Lee Barrios, retired teacher, St. Tammany, I would hope that BESE would begin to vet some of these recommendations or have more time to vet these ahead of time. With reference to the Florida virtual school, I looked up a little information on them. And first of all, I don't understand why we would be giving our Louisiana tax money to a Florida virtual school. But in a little history, in 2001, Sylvan started Connections Academy because they wanted to get into virtual schooling. In 2011, Pearson acquired Connections Education for in excess of $400 million. It is a for-profit. In 2013, Florida Virtual Schools is a statewide in Florida virtual school. In 2013, the Florida legislature changed funding for FVS. It previously received a full allotment for each student, regardless of the number of online courses, plus a 1/6 allotment for every course taken, which is ridiculous. However, that changed. Now they just get a 1/7 allotment of the traditional student allotment for each online course that the local schools get the remainder. I'm curious as to how this is going to, how it's going to function in the state of Louisiana. They also, Florida Virtual Schools also sells their courses outside of the state for $400 for a 1/2 credit. That's a 1 semester course, one course, and $800 for a full year course, and extra for AP courses. Every county in Florida has its own virtual school, and they're franchisees, many of them of Connections Academy, so they're in competition. In 2015, Pasco County's e-school had issues with Connections Academy. They found themselves unable to sign up for the students for the school's classes at the e-school. Instead, district officials said they were given only one option, Florida Virtual Schools. It was said that the Pasco e-school was closed for registration or full, which was not true. When the legislature changed their funding for Florida Virtual, they experienced a 32% decline in student enrollment and a reduction of $17.6 million in state funding. Thus, they were trying to get students from other virtual schools. Their grading system is 89.5 to 100 is an A, ours is 94 to 100, and so on and so forth. They also students at Florida Virtual School no longer must pass their final exams to earn course credits. Instead, they simply have to take the test, which will count for 20% of their grade, and have their overall work comprise a passing score.
Ms. Barrios, please wrap up your comment.
Okay, so I asked that the board at least find out how the virtual school is going to operate for the state of Louisiana. Have you been given a contract? It wasn't included in the public documents for review. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Moe?
Debbie Moe, representing LAE. I am not a fan of virtual schools. I do understand that they have a role to play, and in those areas where it's impossible to find an instructor, obviously having the online instruction is better than not having instruction at all. However, I do hope that we would, number one, make sure that the quality of this school is up to our standards. Number two, that our children are being guided by not only their parents but counselors who let them know specifically what is required for them to be successful in a virtual learning atmosphere. And three, I would like to see us make a more concerted effort in making sure that those hard-to-place areas or in rural areas where instructors are hard to find, that we try to begin some kind of a program or programs that would supply that need. I am a foreign language teacher, and in my home parish, we no longer have any live French education. It is all on computer, it's all virtual. Many of the students will have told me that they don't feel comfortable, that they're being well prepared. There is no one-on-one, and anytime you learn a language, it's got to be that kind of intimate, conversational, one-on-one kind of instruction. So I think a blended model would be much better than going strictly with a virtual model. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Dr. Jones, did you have a comment or question?
Yes, I actually founded one of the first virtual schools in a school district in Louisiana, and I bought about 1/3 of my curricular materials from Florida Virtual School. They are one of the oldest virtual schools in the country, and they provided curricula to many states and to many local school districts for years and years. The courses that they provide, they either provide the curricular materials or they provide the materials and the instructors. And it provides a lot of options for school districts that aren't able to get, as Ms. Moth pointed out, instructors for certain courses. It also provides a lot of course material to school districts who are trying to provide opportunities for kids to catch up, who are behind and so forth, and so they allow them to take extra programs. I just want to say my experience with Florida Virtual over the years has been, it's been one of the top providers of online curriculum in the United States. And I bought from several different vendors. They were just one of them, but my experience with Florida Virtual was always great.
Any other comments? No? Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. What is our next item?
Your next item is on page 32, item 5.1, consideration of the annual approval of alternative education programs and alternative education schools. The department recommendation is to receive.
Is there a motion to receive? Ms. Holloway?
Second.
And second by Mr. Davis. Thank you.
I'm sorry, the motion is to approve.
Sorry, the motion is to approve. Ms. Holloway and Mr. Davis? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Context,
Thank you.
Superintendent White?
Members, there's a requirement in the law that you approve alternative programs and alternative schools. This has been a matter that the board has done on a fairly routine basis per the law over time. But I would suggest that the advent of ESSA will allow us to take another look at this, and I think we should. I'm, of course, suggesting that you approve the list here. But I'm also suggesting that we take a more detailed look at what exactly constitutes an alternative program versus an alternative school in our state. And the reason I'm suggesting that is that there is a question that will be called, and I've spoken with Ms. Voce quite a lot about this, and Dr. Jones as well, about what is the appropriate accountability for an alternative setting. I would be the first to tell you, I don't think that an alternative school that adheres strictly to the definition of the statutes, which serves students who have been removed from the traditional setting, should be graded in the traditional manner. It just serves no purpose. However, the federal statutes require that all schools be graded in the same way. So you have a tension between the idea of an alternative school and the idea that all schools should be graded in the same way. I have a feeling that there's a way of reconciling this, which is by defining appropriately what a program is versus what a school is. But candidly, our agency and this board have not done a lot of work in recent years on this issue, and I would suggest to you that you should approve this today, but recognize that this is not a appropriately detailed way of viewing this issue. We need to come back with specific definitions as to what these things constitute, what are the guidelines that we're providing, what is a means of looking at quality versus lack of quality, and really dig in on this. I've had conversations to this effect with, as I said, educators, also, however, with juvenile justice advocates, advocates for students with disabilities and other disaffected populations, and I think we've got to get this right. We are going to have full-time staff dedicated to this issue so that when we come back with our ESSA proposal, you'll see it adequately fleshed out, and I wanted to provide some advanced conversation of that issue. Thank you.
Ms. Boche?
And I'm glad to hear Superintendent White make those comments, because this has been a pet peeve of mine for years and years and years, even with his predecessor. Historically, every district had an alternative school. And because of the accountability program and the negative effects the accountability formula had for alternative schools, most districts, as you can see from the list that you have in front of you, chose to make their alternative schools, to call them programs, so that their independent scores would be rolled back to the sending school. And to me, that's just circumventing the real issue of how do we measure successful alternative schools. And if alternative schools deal with specific populations of students who have been removed from the regular setting, the measures to determine what their value is and if they are successful should be decidedly different than the regular formula, the formula that we have for all other schools. There need to be components of how do we work with those students in their social, emotional, and behavioral aspects and interventions necessary to work with them to make them more productive citizens and to try to get them to the point where they can be successful in a regular structured high school or middle school or whatever their sending school was. And until we face that as a state in each district, then we're doing a disservice to the students in those alternative schools and actually in the communities where these schools exist, because we are not, looking for research-based interventions that will be effective with those particular students. And the more we push it aside and put it under the guise of a program, it's almost out of sight, out of mind, whereas it needs to be front and center within our communities. How do we deal with these children, and how do we get them to be successful in life as well as in school? So I'm glad to see Superintendent White that we are going to focus on that and hopefully make that a part of our ESSA plan and give credit to those schools which are dealing effectively with those populations.
Dr. Jones.
It's so ironic to hear this conversation this morning. I see Will Centel sitting out there, and I'm sure he remembers when I fought a very protracted battle with Superintendent White's previous superintendent over a dropout recovery school that I had that had students that were 25, 26 years old in some cases, who had dropped out of school 2 and 3 times, who had children of their own. And when this accountability system came in, that school got a accountability score of 16 because it didn't have any of the typical kids that are in a program like that, or adults, in this case, young adults. And so we fought a very protracted battle that went all the way to the state legislature, and a bill was actually passed that Governor General vetoed, and I was glad he did, quite frankly, but that would have excluded that one school from it. And Governor General talked to me about it and said that he was going to veto it, and I said you should, because we shouldn't have a bill every legislative session for individual exceptions to the thing. But this was the very issue at the root of that. And at that time, and that's been almost 10 years ago, I believe, maybe even longer. We've been fighting. And at that time, the compromise that was done between the superintendent and myself was that we would take that school and change it from a school to a program, the very thing that that Doris Voce is talking about happen now, and it was copied all over the state. But at the time that was done, the compromise was that within a year, we would have a separate accountability system developed for those type of schools and those type of programs. And it's 10 years later, and we haven't done anything with it. And this is something, those are special programs, special situations, and they need their own separate special accountability system. At the time, I even went to Texas and got all of their programs and brought them over and provided them in hopes that we might take a look at those. But I really hope, Superintendent White, that we do follow up on this and that we do come up with something that's a little bit more reflective of what should be accurately done to assess these programs.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing that I'll just put a place marker here to save this away for future comments or future meetings. The challenge is we are going to need your help in navigating the federal statutes, because I don't think that the federal government in the way that this administration has oriented itself, and there will be another administration there. But as I read ESSA, it pretty clearly says every school, not every program, but every school must be evaluated in the same manner if it has the same grade levels. Now, there may be some wiggle room there, but I think it's an unfortunately imperfect outcome. And I tried to advocate in Washington for an alternative school category, even if you limit it to a certain percentage of the students. But the Congress did not end up accepting that, and we kind of are where we are. So I think it'll be a difficult and detailed discussion, but I'm hoping we can get to where Dr. Jones described.
So we'll probably be back to programs again?
Well, I don't know exactly how to do it when the federal law says what it says, but I think we should get into it. I think we should review it. And this has to be something that we come out of ESSA feeling like we can all rally behind a framework, because it's not acceptable to do it in a perfunctory way like this, but it's also not acceptable to not address the issues that you're rightly raising.
Right. And I would like to volunteer my services on that at the time that you discuss that, because I do have some ideas I think would actually fix it.
Well, Jessica and Jennifer and Aaron and Ryan, maybe we can pull together and can, with a couple of members, I'm sure Ms. Voce would want to be a part of that as well, and maybe others. We could brainstorm on this issue.
Thank you. We do have, we have some comment cards on 5-1. I'm going to call up Mr. Jimmy Gore and then also Mr. Sean Fleming.
Good morning, members of the BESE.
Can you pull the microphone closer, ma'am? And make sure the green light is on. Got it.
Hello?
It still doesn't. Do we have volume, Shan?
Good morning. Good? Okay. Okay. Every time I have to come up here, I always have a problem with the microphone. Okay, good morning. I see that you have good intentions and, helping out the alternative schools, and I understand that. I've gone through that experience myself. I've been a teacher. I see the problems in the, public schools, and, it's not behavior a lot of times, it's communication. They become frustrated, and, it's just so obvious to me. Now you're saying that the alternative, so it's an alternative school program. Children and students, they have options, right, in that program. Do they have options? Sign language, American Sign Language, for the deaf, or, for a teacher. I mean, if you put a school into the mainstream, then they don't have an interpreter, or, the teachers don't know sign language, and, it's very painful for children. They become very frustrated and fall behind, and I've seen it. I'm 61, and it hasn't changed yet. In Louisiana, wow, it's one of the worst schools for the deaf kids. And even in, especially in mainstream, and I'm not trying to be critical, I just want to improve it. I'm not trying to criticize anyone. I just want to work with y'all to improve it for the deaf children. I have 2 deaf sons, and they're so successful, and I want the same for these children. Okay. in all of the program, there is no mention of Louisiana School for the Deaf. You know, why isn't it in the list? You know, it's like LRE, other public schools are not LRE, you know, for deaf children, truly. There's one example, like in a public school system, you know, the hallway, the kids, you know, after class or going to class, all the kids are talking, or in the cafeteria, or you go to nurse, or, you know, whatever happens in the school environment, there are all these children and teachers talking. They can hear all of their, you know, all of their meetings, all of their conversations. You know, someone says, get over it, you know, or get over with it, or, but, you know, they imagine, you know, deaf children coming into that program where there's no access to sign language. They're so lost. That's, I mean, you call that LRE? No, it's definitely not. It's so limited. You know, LRE is good for people that have, you know, children that have hearing. You know, that's great. But a deaf child in that scenario, I mean, imagine going to a school where everyone used sign language and then no one talked. You would have to have an interpreter there to talk for you. You know, so that's not LRE. You know, so, you know, we just want to, you know, make sure you understand that it's so different. Language is, you know, people overlook language, and it's so important. You know, when, you know, 0 to 5, it's, you know, that window of time is so important. You know, after that they start to struggle. So the alternative program, you know, it's, if you could try to make sure that you provide, you know, sign language interpreters. And there was one child that got kicked out of school in Louisiana recently. They kicked him out of the deaf school. He had to go into a mainstream school, and I mean, it was just chaos. There was no communication. No one could communicate with him. So finally they let him back into LSD, and now he's happy because there's communication there. And so we want y'all to just think about that, and, you know, please, I'm here to help. I'd love to work with y'all on this. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Mr. Fleming.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Sean Fleming, the Deputy Director of the Louisiana Developmental Disabilities Council. I'm going to ask that y'all really reframe your understanding of what's going on. And our accountability system does not work in measuring how well students are taught. As this gentleman just brought up, how well they're served, how well they're given access to an education. The goal of education in Louisiana's Constitution is that every student will have the opportunity to reach their potential. And yet, our accountability system has measured which students are in a school. And when you start talking about having a different accountability system, and this is the rationale why I'm sure the people who advocated to make sure we did not have separate accountability systems for different schools, is the decision starts to become who to exclude, who do I not serve. And when you look at our accountability system in Louisiana, it reflects that. And as it relates to kids with disabilities, it reflects it really, really hard. If you take all the schools with more than 40% of their students with disabilities, do y'all want to know what their grades are? What their school grade is? Anyone care to guess? Doris? You know.
Mr. Fleming, this isn't a back and forth.
I'm
Please
sorry,
make your
but
comments.
she was laughing and winking at me. So we know, though, we all know they have Fs. And the common factor of all the schools that tend to rise to the top of our accountability system is based on student selection. The kids I advocate for are not picked to be on that team. So what y'all are saying right now, it really just sent a shiver down my spine, because if our solution is to seek a measurement system of how we can measure the schools when those kids are excluded, we've just taken a huge step backwards. because we know that the one thing that ensures that kids grow more academically is that they're giving access to instruction, to the curriculum, to language at an early age, to the supports that are necessary for them. And I find it interesting that when we looked at our early education system, the accountability system is very different than our K-12 system. Because it scared me then, but y'all, we rose to the challenge. We weren't measuring the sheer output of kids, which tends to actually restrict kids who tend to perform at the bottom. Kids with disabilities fall into that group a lot. And it also really restricts the giving credit for schools at the students at the very top, because they top out at those systems. Those metrics don't work for them either. And so I'm going to just implore you as we move forward in this process that the one thing that you really have to think about with our accountability system is it should measure how well a school serves every single student that walks in their door. Our society, human nature, Mother Nature, is made of variability. There is no student that shows up the same. Some of the school districts were impacted greatly by a lot of the flooding and other disasters that will strike. And what I ask is, how well do those schools serve those students that are walking in the door, not how well they serve the students they choose to select. And then we create another system that everybody knows it's there, and if you build it, they will send them there. And give them that way to say, well, I only teach these kids. And then you're going to start setting up a scenario, if you go down that road, of defining which those kids are. And I can guarantee you the kids I advocate for and I am here for are not in that group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming. Are there any other comment cards? Sorry, Mr. Richard.
Good morning. Scott Richard, representing the Louisiana School Boards Association. Had no intentions to comment on this matter, but since the discussion focused into some historical perspective from Superintendent Jones, I think it's important to bring to the table today, at least for the record, a focus on the legislature's will to do some of the things that you're talking about now. As recently as the 2016 regular legislative session, Act 500 was signed into law by the governor that requires a mutual accountability team authorized by BESE to convene a mutual accountability team to draft and propose to BESE a specialized accountability program for the Office of Juvenile Justice Schools. It requires those recommendations to be presented no later than March 1st of 2017. And it goes on to delineate what that means for our students, our most at-risk students that are housed in juvenile facilities. So the item of the topic that you're discussing is very relevant. To date, I'm not aware that any action has been taken regarding this specific law that's in place that goes to the heart of the matter of what you're discussing today. And we would welcome more discussion on opening up the dialogue, as Superintendent Voce mentioned and Superintendent Jones mentioned, on this key component of school accountability for every public school district in our state. Thank you.
Members, just to respond to that, Mr. Richard is talking about a resolution that was, or a statute that's been put into place, creating a body that will study Office of Juvenile Justice secure care facilities. Those are students who are in the juvenile justice system and are currently on-site being educated in that setting by the Office of Juvenile Justice. That task force, which we are involved in but are not operating, unlike what Mr. Richard noted, has met. And that process is underway and on schedule to deliver the recommendations by March 1st of 2017.
Mr. Garvey.
Yes, I have a question for the superintendent. the first paragraph in the supporting document says, pursuant to state law, local education agencies must provide an alternative education placement for all students suspended for a period of more than 10 consecutive days, school days. Is there, 10 days seems like a long period of time. It seems like, to me, if a school suspends a child for a few days, they maybe ought to be providing some sort of education to that child. Is there any movement in the legislature to shorten this 10-day requirement to a shorter period of time so that we don't have children suspended and running around the streets instead of spending time in some alternative school setting?
Not to my knowledge, but so not to my knowledge is there any thinking about shortening that 10-day provision in the statute. But there is a lot of discussion about this issue generally. Probably not a new thing. I'm sure others can provide some testimony for the record, as I see the laughter from everybody on this side of the aisle. There was a task force that was formed by the legislature. Senator Donahue passed a bill, and in fact, I think Mr. Santel wrote a piece about this commission that was formed.
And that's what brought my attention.
Yeah.
Caused this to grab my attention was that report.
Yeah, and I think that there will be something coming out of that very likely will recommend some adjustment, I don't know what it will be, to the overall spectrum. I sensed from the initial discussion that it wasn't focused so much on the period of time that makes a student eligible for an alternative setting, so much on is suspension an appropriate, out-of-school suspension, an appropriate disciplinary means, if so, for what students, and even more fundamentally than the period of time. But I think all of these things are on the table. There's very clearly a national consciousness of this issue. I do think that depending on who is elected president, that will continue. And it's something that we need to address. ESSA gives us a good chance to address it. But I will tell you, I'm of two minds on the issue, and I think you see that reflected in the discussion. On one hand, I thought that the point that was made in the testimony about disempowering educators, it's fair to say you don't ever want to do that. But on the other hand, you want to make sure that people are equipped to do the responsible thing. So there's two sides of this coin, and I hope that the task force will deal with it appropriately.
Maybe I can phrase the question a different way. Are there any LEAs in Louisiana that use a shorter period of time than 10 days?
The law is the law, although I think that there are so many different permutations of this, and I'm about to step aside so that voices of greater expertise can speak to it than I can.
Mr. Garvey.
Please.
Yes, Dr. Jones.
Virtually every school district in Louisiana uses shorter time periods than the 10 days. The 10 days is an extreme. It's gone a long way before it gets to 10 days. But the big thing that's changed in Louisiana, and it just shows how time softens everything. When I started out as a teacher and principal, when a kid got suspended, they couldn't even make up the work. It was automatic zeros for those days. Those days are gone. Now if a kid gets suspended for 3 days, typically they're provided with the work while they're gone. They're allowed to make it up when they come back if they don't do it while they're gone. The 10-day rule is not generally something that happens on the first or even second time. It's something that happens after it's gotten pretty extreme. But in every case with that, the districts have almost always now gone to providing the instructional materials and support for them. In fact, one of the reasons that I set up the school that I set up in the first place was to deal with those long-term suspensions.
But that's providing material for the student to work on at home or outside of the school.
No, actually, in some cases, the districts even have it where the kids actually go to another site for the time that they're out for suspension. Many of the districts, I'd say probably 2/3 at least, of the districts have an alternative site set for those kids that when they get, or they do now, most of them do in-school suspensions. They actually have the in-school suspension program inside their own school where that kid goes there and does that work. So it's not like it's, you're seeing the one extreme, the 10-day exclusion rule. You're not seeing all the PBIS programs and things like that are in place before that gets to it. So virtually every school district and every school has those kind of programs in place now.
Ms. Boucher?
Yeah, just to echo that, not, I guess, elongate the conversation too much. But as Dr. Jones says, every school district has something in place. There's got to be a point at which when behavior becomes such, even with your little ones at home, you do timeouts. You know, go sit over here for 5 minutes, I'll set the timer, or whatever it's going to be. And as kids progress through the educational setting, there are times when you have to make a point to say, we're going to give you a timeout from the regular school setting. Now, that can be in-school suspensions, which most schools and school districts do, or an in-school alternative area where you put them in, where they're doing the work and they're receiving instruction, to things which might be 3, 4, 5 days, which might occur off-site, which to me are alternative type programs that you're doing. This part in law with the 10 days, I think, was an attempt by the legislature to say there's got to be a point at which you have to, by law, provide something. And I think when we start to legislate this less than 10 days, you're going to get into this really large quagmire. I think there's got to be, I mean, even with, I think Mr. Fleming will tell you, with students with disabilities, you can't exclude for more than a certain number of days the entire school year. If you did this with a student 10, right?
Yeah.
So when you do this with a student with disabilities, then you've excluded him for the whole amount of time that you're allowed for an entire year. So that there's all kinds of nuances with that. Not that I'm saying that the students with disabilities are going to be the ones in alternative programs or schools. So there are programs in place for in-school suspensions or in-school alternative settings, off-site alternative settings. It all takes money, it all takes resources, it takes communications from the sending teacher to the people who are going to monitor that child's progression at that period of time by sending appropriate work and receiving appropriate instruction and feedback. So it's a very complex system or a complex issue. But the accountability system, you know, germane to this particular topic, I'm one of the few who refuses to name my alternative school a program just on general principle. So we'll accept, you know, as my F school in my district because I will not make it a program. If I made it a program, then I wouldn't have any problems in terms of the accountability system. But I just think that if we all do that and acquiesce and make them programs, it hides a real need that we have to address this problem.
Ms. Edmonston?
And I don't think our regular accountability formula, as Mr. Fleming has talked about, you know, we rate A schools, and if you looked at the draft of ESSA, I'm concerned with some of them that we're going to disenfranchise our students with disabilities again, even more. We finally got them in the accountability program at the high school level, where a lot of their successes and their work and their diplomas count full. And now some of this draft, and I've had some discussions with department staff about it, if it's implemented the way it's drafted, we will disenfranchise them again and minimize and devalue their accomplishments. So this is a very complex issue that deals with alternative schools, but also deals with our accountability formula in and of itself. Sometimes we're rating it as an A school when it's actually an A student body according to our program, not necessarily an A school. And I think we have to grapple with that, make that distinction. I realize that's not germane to this topic, Dr. Volpe, but I guess we started this discussion very glad that we're going to discuss this issue this year and hopefully come up with some recommendations.
And understanding there's not any easy answers
No,
to any of
there is
this.
no easy answer.
Ms. Edmonston?
Yeah, and I just would echo that. I'm really glad we're going to have this conversation, and I think it's very important. While I agree with everything that Dr. Jones and Ms. Boche said, I believe it does vary from district to district and school to school. And so I think it's extremely important that we vet this whole alternative system. I also would like to ask the task force that was developed from Senator Donohue's legislation. Do we, John, who do we have representation on there?
We do, yes.
Okay.
I know Aaron, Mike Como, and Jamie are all part of the process, and I believe Mike is our designate.
Okay, okay, thank you.
And then Mr. Garvey had some questions about discipline, and I understand that we have a report that details some of the statistics on discipline.
We have data collection annually so I'm happy to present that to the board or to it's certainly part of this task force as well.
Thank you. Okay. And then we have another comment card on this item, Ms. Harris.
Good morning, BESE members. I'm Millie Harris, Executive Director of JCFA. We have two of the schools who you all are considering approval again this year, and I do just want to echo the comments that we need to have a stronger accountability system aligned to alternative schools so that we can continue to support our students and our parents, our faculty and staff and administrators who are working in alternative settings to provide our students with access to the most challenging and rigorous curriculums and opportunities, and the current system does not really provide for that. One of our campuses is a D-rated school, the other one is an F-rated school, but we serve the most at-risk kids in our local communities. These students are graduating, they're going to college, and they're actually achieving tops in TOPS Tech. But we're not rated a better school because they're graduating in the 5th, 6th, and 7th year of their cohorts. So they're behind, and they're not being applauded for their dedication and their persistence and their hard work. And I really think it's something that you all need to consider so that you can value the students who are striving to better themselves in alternative settings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Bobby, I have a question. Ma'am, JCFA, where is that?
We have actually 3 campus sites, one in Algiers, one in Harvey,
Okay.
and one in Old Jefferson.
In New Orleans. And JCFA stands for?
Just JCFA.
Oh, okay. Okay.
What did it used to stand for?
Thank
It
you.
used to stand for the Jefferson Chamber Foundation Academy.
Okay, good. Thank you for what you're doing for our at-risk children.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
that.
much.
Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item was pulled from consent. It is on page 38. Item 6.1, consideration of an update report on the Special Education Advisory Panel. Updated documentation has been distributed. The department recommendation is to receive.
Is there a motion to receive? I hear a motion by Dr. Jones, a second by Ms. Edmonston. I have 2 comment cards, Ms. Lee Barrios and Mr. Larry Carter. Okay. Mr. Carter, do we have the wrong item for your comment card? Okay, do you know what the item, can I ask you to get with staff to figure out what item it is? Or was it the item that we just finished? Oh, good. Okay. What's that? Oh, okay. Thank you. Ms. Barrios.
Lee Barrios, retired teacher, St. Tammany. I just wanted, I thought this was the appropriate moment to address a concern that I've had for quite a long time, previous BESE committee, and now the current. I realize this is a Department of Ed advisory panel, not a BESE panel. However, I have requested the previous BESE member on SEEP and the current one to provide all the materials when the agenda goes out that are going to be covered in the meeting, and I believe that's taken place. However, there still is no recording whatsoever of these SEEP meetings. And I went to the one the other day, and it was very extensive. The conversation, there were 4 very important subjects. There was an obvious lack of understanding by many members of the SEEP committee. They discussed or presented a discussion of ESA and several other subjects. So I would ask that whoever has the authority to begin recording those SEEP meetings, that they be recorded not only for the public, but for the people on the committee to go back and review some of the in-depth discussion and concerns that they have. Thank you.
Ms. Edmiston, do you have comments?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I see Superintendent White's not here, but I would echo that. I think that's a good idea. Here he comes.
Yeah, I see nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
In fact, I believe that we have begun to videotape, or we're planning to begin videotaping those panels. So, yeah, I would agree, and let's make sure the next one is taped.
Do we need a motion for that?
I don't think so. We will do that.
Right.
We will videotape.
Holly? Yes, that was already in discussion about recording those meetings. A conversation has been with the SPED department.
Thank you. All right. Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 41, item 6.2, consideration of an update report on the Accountability Commission. Additional nomination information has been distributed. The department recommendation is to receive the report and approve the educator representative and the non-public representative appointments to the Accountability Commission.
Is there a motion to receive and approve?
So moved.
So Mr. Davis moves to receive and approve. Is there a second? Ms. Holloway? Yes, Mr. Rock?
Dr. Moody, I would like to request that when we get to the recommendation 3, to defer that until the December meeting.
Is that for the second individual to be added? Is that what you're referring to as number 3?
Yeah, number 3.
Okay. So we will break this up. Does that work for your staff? Okay. Do we have any comment cards? Let me take this. I'll go back through it, guys, so you know what we're doing. All right. Ms. Barrios, do you have public comment?
Lee Barrios, retired teacher, St. Tammany. In the process of trying to understand this committee and what it does and is supposed to do, and the makeup committee, I look back at a little bit of the history. In 1997, Act 478 created the Accountability Commission. In later year, which I can't remember, the legislature withdrew that act. At the same time, the federal government requires that each state have a committee of practitioners to advise and oversee, I guess, Title I issues. And at some point, I believe it was 2013, those committees, one which didn't exist anymore, really, and the Committee of Practitioners were sort of merged into what we now have as Accountability Commission. So who should be on those committees is now very confusing. The federal government requires all education people be on their Committee of Practitioners. The Accountability Commission is very top-heavy with other than educators, and even has the business component. So I would love for BESE to readdress that issue and what's not being, how do we get away with not having the federally mandated Committee of Practitioners, specifically to the nomination, the second nomination of Ms. Zito. With all due respect for Ms. Zito and what she does, I don't believe she qualifies or really would be able to offer the important, to participate in an important way on that committee. She's not a teacher, and she has a school that has, I believe, under 50 students, a private school, and I just don't believe that she's going to be an equivalent replacement to who was on there previously. Thank you.
We have a presentation by the chair of the Accountability Commission. I'd like to call up Kathy Noel for that presentation, please. And the staff is going to go ahead and get the presentation loaded here. Board members, a printed copy of this presentation was handed out. If any of you need it, let me know so we can get you a copy.
Good
morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. My name is Kathy Noel. I am serving as the current chairperson of the Accountability Commission. I am also the Director of Student Learning in DeSoto Parish School System. I'm proud to say I'm still a mathematics teacher at heart. That's basically where I spent my years in the classroom. I won't take a lot of your time today, but I do want to provide just an overview for a short period of time on the history of the Accountability Commission and also the purpose of the Accountability Commission. Louisiana's School and District Accountability Commission serves as an advisory commission. It was first established by Louisiana legislature in 1997 by Act 478. Its purpose at that time was to study and make recommendation to the state board concerning all aspects of this statewide system of school and district accountability. I was there at that time. I actually sat in the audience at that time listening to those conversations. And that Act 478 and this Accountability Commission was to be fully implemented in terms of that system by the year 1999-2000. Through Act 1137, which was in 2001, the legislature abolished the commission, but BESE chose to retain a similar commission of stakeholders to provide continued advice to the board and the Department of Education on matters pertaining to school and district accountability. And in 2013, the board consolidated the commission with the state's Committee of Practitioners, a state-level stakeholder advisory committee at the time. And that group was required by federal law to advise state education agencies on the implementation of state plans that were established pursuant to Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This group, along with others that were designated by the legislature, has also been called upon to study and make recommendations relative to a number of issues, including educator evaluations and accountability for education programs provided in state juvenile justice secure care facilities, as you've heard about already today. Forgive me, I have not practiced where I'm headed on this screen. I actually, we composed for you a list of Accountability Commission members. You have that in your packet. We've given you the names. We've given you where they're coming from. You'll notice that we are coming from varied sources of backgrounds. I think that for me, I've been able to see and work along a lot of colleagues out from our education system out in our districts. But I did want you to see that list. You have that list. Of course, I'm sure you know some of these people from the different districts around and of course the other areas that are being represented. But I did not want you to not have this list today. Another thing I wanted to do very quickly for you was to basically share with you what the Accountability Commission does. We actually meet regularly. You have seen our schedule. We meet regularly to study and make recommendations to the Department of Education and also to you all. In the past, we've actually made recommendations on a wide range of pressing issues that have been related to Louisiana's teacher, school, and district accountability systems, such as the actual original school and district accountability formula and the star rating system, policies for the transition to higher academic expectations, and then revisions to the Louisiana teacher evaluation system known as COMPAS. Today, the Accountability Commission is tasked with recommending to the Louisiana Department of Ed, and of course you, the timeline and benchmarks that are needed to gradually raise the standard for student proficiency such that the average student in a school or a district with a letter grade of A are achieving at what we now know is the mastery level on state assessments. And that, of course, is per our Bulletin 111. The commission is also going to be making recommendations on the various components of Louisiana's ESSA accountability framework. And what I'm bringing to you today is an actual, on in your packet there, you're going to notice the actual recommendations, I'm sorry, not recommendations, but considerations of ESSA that we'll be following through or working through. My laptop has frozen, but I pretty much know what page I'm on in terms of the paperwork you have in front of you. After those considerations, and I think there are 6 or 7 there, you're also on the last page going to find our upcoming regularly scheduled meetings. We're inviting you to be there. I think you'll be happy to know that the vision of the group is to look, thank you, is to look at ESSA through the eyes of improving student achievement in Louisiana to where we can become, in terms of national competition, at the top of the list. We also are very interested in a vision of leading indicators that will lead us into the unique characteristics of a lot of situations throughout our state, where districts and schools can identify areas that they'd like to work on that possibly they've not had the opportunity to do so in the past. So in light of that, we'd like to, of course, welcome you and invite you at any time to any of our meetings. And also, I've provided you my email address. Feel free to contact me as a chairperson of the Accountability Commission. I would welcome any conversation you have or wish to have. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to tell you that I love your title, Director of Student Learning.
So do I. Thank you.
It seems like you love your work as well. So
Yes.
Thank you so much for your service. Board members, yes, Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones,
You and she ought to like it because she picked it, and when Walter Lee was her superintendent. So
It's a great title. Did you put your microphone back together, Dr. Jones? Thank you. Superintendent White, do you have any other remarks that you'd like to add?
I just wanted to thank you for coming. It's a long drive from DeSoto Parish to be here today. I assume that BESE members oftentimes work with staff, and I see Jennifer there as well at the department on accountability issues. But if I take what you're saying, you're amenable to individual conversations with BESE members about the proceedings of the commission as well. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. So, do I need a motion from Mr. Rock in order to break this up, or can I go ahead and do that?
Okay, can we vote on receiving the minutes and the report and vote on, do you want to take Ms. Germany?
Yeah, I'd like to break things up.
Okay, so can we just vote on the presentation that we just had, which was the report and the minutes from September 12th?
We could change my motion to receive just the report. And then we can
Receive
have-
the report and approve the minutes? Do you need to approve the minutes or receive the minutes? Receive, yeah.
So I'll change my motion to just receive this point.
Thank you. So I think Ms. Holloway was the original second, so that when that motion is in order, is there any objection? Those are usually the easiest. Great. Motion carries. So for the next part.
The next recommendation is the department recommends the board approve an individual to serve as the educator representative on the Accountability Commission as appointed by the board president. And the name is Dr. Kim Germany.
Thank you. Okay, is there a motion to approve this item? Okay, so moved by Mr. Garvey. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Lewis. Is there any objection? Okay, hearing none, motion passes. Now, I understand that Mr. Rock would like to defer the third one to December. Is there a second? So is that correct, Mr. Rock? Okay. So Mr. Rock would like to defer the third item to December. Is there a second for Mr. Rock's deferral? Okay, I see Ms. Boche second. Would you guys like to discuss?
I would.
Mr. Garvey?
Yeah, can we get somebody from the department to give us the background on this candidate?
Yeah, if you would, Aaron. I recognize that.
Sure. Aaron Bendeley from the department. There has always been, or for many years, has been a non-public school member of the Accountability Commission. In the past, that was Sister Anna Lariviere. I always get her last name wrong. She recently reached out to us and said that she wished to go ahead and resign, noted some other time commitments that were making it difficult for her to make the meeting. So that position is now vacant. It does need to be a representative of a non-public school. And so that was the vacancy that I believe we were attempting to fill today, so that we could, certainly this is a group that meets very regularly. They have a lot of work in front of them right now as we prepare and explore options for our state plan under ESSA. So that would be the downside in deferring, is that we do have a couple of meetings scheduled between now and December.
And is this lady qualified?
Ms. Zito is a school leader of a non-public school here in Baton Rouge, Gardier Christian Community School. I believe she has been in the education field for 35 years. I know she provided a brief bio to you. One consideration I know is that right now we have a number of advisory councils where we have members of non-public schools. This would be the first, I don't know if it would be the first ever, but definitely the first in a while, where we had a non-public school member coming from a non-Catholic school. And so that was one consideration. I know some of those schools wished, expressed a desire to also be able to participate in some of these advisory council meetings.
Members, a handout on this item with Ms. Zito's information was put in your packet of the updated documents.
I have a comment.
Yes, Ms. Lewis.
I guess I can direct this to Shan. I really think we need to revisit the policies on these recommendations. I think board members would like more time to vet some different candidates, for input, qualifications. I know it was a last minute decision, and I know, Mr. Rock and other people may have had other, considerations, and we just need to revisit what that policy should be and the timeline on that to get input for the members. Yeah, it's not that anything personal.
And we understand that. We regret the last minute addition. This was a resignation that just happened last week, and we knew this was already on the agenda. So if it was possible to fill this vacancy and have the non-public community represented in the next couple of meetings, we certainly wanted to make an attempt to do so, but totally understand your concerns.
Sure, no problem. But I think what the question here is that board members have more input in the commission. Thank you.
Ms. Boche?
I'm looking at the makeup of the Accountability Commission, and they're all, I'm sure, very good people and very qualified in their areas and very representative of either their school districts or organizations and such that they represent. I'm a little concerned. I'd like to know who nominates people for this. Is this the department recommending, say, to either the board president or... Okay.
So it's in the executive recommendation, in the exec rec outlines.
Right, but the department is making recommendations of these people, and I too, like Ms. Lewis and Ms. Holloway, would appreciate some input into, I guess, recommendations for these different commissions or committees that we are forming. We're being asked to approve something, and we don't know really much about anyone, nor who is recommending them. In other words, if we wanted in a, say in an accountability coordinator, if there's a spot for that, I'm not even sure exactly what the spots are, if they're designated for certain groups of people, then maybe we'd want a recommendation from the accountability coordinators in the state, who they feel would be most comfortable to represent them. So I'd like to know, I guess, who makes these recommendations, either to the BESE board president or to us as a whole. And I would like some time to vet people, or to look at it, or to look at a group of people, and possibly to have some input. And then the statement about not having anyone except a Catholic on all these commissions. I know that I have an appointment to the, God, I forgot which advisory committee, and I think it's a non-public, and it is not, my appointment is not from the Catholic Church family, it's from a different denomination. So we do have people on different commissions from other denominations other than just the Catholic Church. So it's kind of fast. I understand that you just got your resignation last week or whenever it occurred, but we come to a meeting, or we get a piece of paper a couple of days ahead of time saying, this is the person, and we haven't even looked at a group of people, and we're being asked to approve that recommendation. So
I'm going to let Superintendent White talk, and then Mr. Rock, and then Dr. Jones. Not yet, Dr. Jones.
Would you consider letting me go first, because I think what I'm going to ask is going to tie directly into what he's.
Well, Mr. Rock has been waiting patiently, and Superintendent White wants to address Ms. Boche, so we might have to get him to talk twice. Go ahead, Superintendent.
If my answer is going to be redundant, are you okay?
Well,
that's fine.
What I just want a clarification here. My understanding is that these traditional categories that are shown here were the categories that were in the original legislation. But when this commission was actually abolished and the BESE took it up as a commission, we're not required by statute to do those positions that way anymore, are we?
I'll answer both questions then with the history. There was in the state law an accountability commission created by the legislature. Under the last iteration of NCLB, there was also something required called a committee of practitioners that effectively was charged by the feds with studying the same thing. So we made a decision, this is probably 4 or 5 years ago, with BESE to unify those things into one entity that has a common makeup to the makeup of the past Accountability Commission. Under that regulatory structure, I nominate half of these candidates, and the BESE president nominates half of these, under the assumption that that is the more efficient way to do it, and that ultimately, for the reasons Ms. Boche describes, you need to get the investment of all BESE members. That could be the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it, and I am right about that, right? You're looking at me like I'm not. Yeah. Some by the board, excuse me, you're right, I'm sorry, you're right. So that could be the right way to do it, that could be the wrong way to do it. I don't have a particular view on it. What I would say is that in this case, I appreciate Ms. Boche's comment. I think what you're hearing is, we've been hearing a lot, for example, when I nominated Kelly Joseph to be on the board, a lot of people saying, hey, you're considering the SSA, you've got to move, we got a vacancy, your meetings are about once every 8 weeks, we got a vacancy coming up on one of your meetings, we know you don't have another meeting until December, and our team, working with the board president, rightly felt, I think, that we can't wait another 8 weeks at this moment in time to fill a vacancy. I recognize why that creates the awkwardness that Ms. Boche is describing, and if you need more time to deal with it, that's fine. I just want to let you know that that comes at a cost, which is that a certain perspective will not be represented at a particularly intense time for the board. But I'm not debating it one way or the other. I think there's, it's just a difficult intersection of issues here.
But if the board wanted to, it could change the.
Oh, absolutely. This is all in the bulletin. Yes, sir.
So in other words, it's not mandated in statute or anywhere else. What we could do now is, if the board itself wanted to change the process for who the composition and who appointed them, you could do that.
You could. Two mitigating facts. I believe this is in our federal plan, and who makes up our committee of practitioners has to be part of our federal plan too. So right now it's in the federal law that this is the way Louisiana will do it. If we're going to change it, they have to approve it too if we're going to keep these things unified. The other thing I would say is that many of these members and their categories are the same people who have been on it for quite some time. Some of them are in the room today. you could argue that is good or bad, and I'm open to your thinking on that as well. But I do want to tell you that it's not as if there has been a lot of turnover or change, which is mainly why this question hasn't come up very often over the last 5 years.
Thank you. Mr. Rock.
You know, as a non-public representative on the board, of course, I just learned this yesterday, and that's why I simply asked for more time. I would like to be involved, and you know, yes, of course, people know that I'm representing Catholic schools because I'm a Catholic school superintendent, and I would very much like to see a person from that arena on this board because of what we're facing in 2017 with the ESSA, and I would like for us to defer it.
Thank you. Ms. Boche.
And just one last comment about the Committee of Practitioners. When that was, and I hate to use the word abolished, I guess merged with the remnants of the Accountability Commission to form this new group, there was a lot of dissension among school systems because they felt the Committee of Practitioners actually represented, they were educators and primarily Title I people entrusted with the disbursement of the federal funds, and were actually very well grounded in what, at that time, NCLB and all of the Title I rules and regulations and what it mandated. And they felt disenfranchised at that time when the Committee of Practitioners was eliminated and I guess merged with this group, and felt that they had very little representation, yet were entrusted with millions of dollars and really knew the ins and outs of the program and what was allowable. So there's been a lot of dissension, I think, since this thing was done at that time, because they did feel disenfranchised at that particular time. And I would like to see if we, our new federal plan, when we look at the makeup, that we really look to see if we can get maybe a better balance with that, and allow maybe more membership from those particular groups. So I like the idea of maybe revisiting the makeup of this at some point and looking how we would develop in our plan what this commission would look like in the future.
May I make one just recommendation before you consider this, just to that point? I would, to the degree it's possible, and I recognize trips to Baton Rouge are not always an easy thing if you don't live near here. I would really recommend to you members going and sitting in the commission meeting to understand the level of technical depth that these meetings get and the nature and tenor of the dialogue and the perspectives represented. Candidly, I feel like we've done a lot of speculating about this commission at the meeting, but most members, I don't believe, if I recall correctly, have been to one of these meetings. And some have, yes. But I think it would be worth, to the degree you're interested in it, going and seeing what is actually debated, who's on it, what the perspectives are, as part of the process that Ms. Voce is representing.
Thank you, Superintendent. So we have a motion on the floor to defer. Is there objection to that motion? Hearing none, motion passes. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 43, item 7.1, consideration of the revisions to Bulletin 111, the Louisiana School District and State Accountability System related to 2016-2017 high school dropout assignment policy. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent.
Is there a motion to approve as a notice of intent? Ms. Holloway, is there a second? Second, Ms. Boche. Superintendent?
Members, you'll recall this is a very, very minute policy. It affects about 30 to 40 students per year out of a graduating class of about 40,000. But we brought it to the last meeting. One of the school systems rightly came to suggest that it could use improvements, and so we deferred it at the last meeting. The dropout policy is intended to assure that when a student drops out, responsibility for that student's score is assigned to the school that is most responsible for serving that child. Every year, there are about 30 to 40 students who there is a request to change their assignment, and yet it's denied because the school that sent the request for the records doesn't submit an official enrollment record to the state. In other words, somebody actually has responsibility for the student, but has essentially refused to accept the records and therefore, or to send the records, and therefore the records, this responsibility remains at the wrong school. This happens again typically in about 30 to 40 cases. The proposed revision, which is not the same policy as was brought a couple of months back, but is a revised version of that, will change the manner in which student dropouts are assigned regarding students who transfer to another school when a request for records is received by the sending school, allowing that when there's a blockage of that transfer of records, the responsibility can now go to the school that actually has full responsibility for the student. Jennifer Baird, who has dealt with these and other such issues for years on our team, is here to respond to questions, and I thank you for considering the policy.
Dr. Jones? No?
How'd you know I wanted to ask a question?
I'm just paying a lot of attention.
My memory was that when this proposal originally came to us, it was assigning it to the principal or the school, the last school where the student attended, and then someone came up and spoke to us, I don't remember who it was, and pointed out that that wasn't fair, so they should go to the school that would have been receiving. But I don't understand the difference in what you're doing here. You're just changing who you're going to lay the problem on. If the person at the receiving school, the school that sent a request for records, if the kid doesn't enroll, then how are we justified in giving them the dropout either?
So Jennifer, why don't we walk it through?
Sure. We've asked a lot of districts about this before we proposed it, and they assured us that when they send a request for records, they're sending it because they are intending to enroll a student. The student is being enrolled. They were all very much in favor of this policy changing. So a student comes to my school, I am going to enroll that student, and then I'm going to send a request for records. If they're not enrolling them, they should not be asking for personally identifiable information for that student.
So to follow up on that, if they send a request for record under the anticipation that the kid's going to come, and then the kid doesn't come, they would still get a credit for a dropout?
Yes, sir.
I believe what she's saying is the child showing up is what initiates the process to begin with. Is that correct?
Yes, they should actually officially enroll them and then request the records.
Well,
and the only exception, I'm sorry.
That happens all the time. I mean, in honesty, the kid comes and says, I'm coming to your school, and they enroll and send a request for records. They don't know anything about the kid or anything that's going with it. But then the kid never shows up. So 2 or 3 days later now, because the kid did that, said, I'm coming to your school, we send the request for records, now we're going to hang them with a dropout? I don't see how that solves the problem any more than the previous problem. I guess is where I'm struggling.
Our rationale for this is that the intention of the dropout penalty is just to encourage people to get students back in school. And we're going to look for the person best poised to do that. The student leaves a district and goes to a district in the north or very far away. They really don't know where they are. The last contact we have for that student is the school that saw them last, intended to enroll them and requested the records. So they are best poised to find that student and get them back in school.
Jennifer, if I could just describe, though, the problem that was originally surfaced for us, just to level set, is that when a student goes to a school to enroll, but for whatever reason the records never get to the school, if the student drops out, the negative, essentially, was still assigned to the old school, even though the new school is actually the one that's been serving the child. Now, Doc, is that right?
Yes, and they could have been there for a few days, and then they just didn't submit the October 1 enrollment.
Dr. Jones, to your point, I think we could probably split hairs on which side of the equation to assign responsibility for a student who's only been in a given school for a couple of days and then drops out. I don't know that we'll ever have a policy that gets to the point of, splitting that hair finely enough. I think our point is we want the school where the child is enrolled and being served academically to be the one that takes full responsibility for the student's results. And whether the records transfer was completed or not, should not be a material factor in that calculation. Is that an appropriate summation of it? Okay.
One follow-up question then.
Please.
So I'm a kid who gets expelled from school district A, and I go to school district B, and don't tell school district B that I was expelled. So the principal at the school in school district B sends a request for records back to the other district, and all of a sudden finds out the kid's expelled, and now I'm in the principal's district B, and I'm going to get hung for if I was a smart principal, I'd say, why don't you go next door to Lincoln Parish and see if they'll take you in. And
although that would be the case irrespective of this policy. If somebody were inclined to act that way, this policy wouldn't impact that.
But the difference is the people that were responsible for the situation in the first place, and I'm going to tell you, I'll probably end up voting for this thing. I just don't think you've solved any problem. All you've done is an administrative issue of changing it where you're going to hang that on, A and B.
I agree with that.
But you haven't solved the basic problem.
Dr. Jones, do you have a solution?
No.
Thank you.
But he's supposed to bring me one.
Well, that's fair. I mean, I think you're right, Dr. Jones. We're just solving a problem of administratively where is it assigned. We're not solving the problem, for better or for worse, of creating an incentive to accept the child, if that's what you're saying.
Well, exactly. But I guess it's like every situation. When you do this, somebody wins and somebody loses on it.
Yeah.
But I just feel like and this is just me personally, if I've had that kid all year long and he goes down the street to another district and applies, stays there 2 days, all of a sudden the responsibility for him not being successful gets transferred to the district that never had anything to do with him.
Which is why we have the full academic year policy in place in other calculations, right?
The full academic year policy doesn't protect against that, though, in cohort, because a dropout in cohort is assigned. But your expulsion concern, we did address, and that's why we brought it back a second time. The parish identified that issue for us. We were very grateful to them. We had a long conversation with them. And so if a student is expelled, this will not be the case. And we will know that because that's the exit reason that they gave for their last enrollment. So that is the change that we're bringing this month.
Is this the recommendation of the majority of superintendents? Or do you know?
I'm sorry?
Is this the recommendation of the majority of superintendents, or do we know?
It is to everyone that we asked, yes.
Ms. Boche,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I thought
Are you
I-
finished, Ms. Baird? I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you finished?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I thought I understood this, but now I'm thoroughly confused. Okay? Let's take the child who is not expelled. He leaves one school, school district A, he goes to B. B requests records and enrolls him for a day or two, and then never sees him again. School district B gets the dropout. So that's what you're talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, now, if the child is expelled from A, he goes to B, B requests the records and says, oh, you can't come here, you were expelled, you have to go to this other school, or whatever. And he never shows up anywhere. Does A get it, or does B get it?
A gets it
A
for
gets
expelled
it.
students, yes.
Now, suppose he's expelled from A, he goes to B, who enrolls him for a couple of days, then finds out he was expelled once they get the records and tells him the same thing. I'm sorry, by state law, I can send, because you were expelled from this other school district, I can send you over here to the alternative school or wherever else I'm going to send you. And he never shows up anywhere. Who gets him at that point?
If the enrollment was officially recorded in Student Information System, School B would.
So what we're telling School B is, until you find out if he's expelled or not, don't officially enroll him. You can request records, but don't officially enroll him.
Yes.
I mean,
in that
that's the
instance-
message we're sending with this.
Yes, ma'am. And in that instance, the parent would give the school the right to ask for those records on behalf of their student. Yes.
So we need to go tell all of our schools when somebody comes in, especially at the high school level primarily, that if you're going to request records, don't officially enroll the student until you get the records. Because if they're expelled, I mean, you know, the message that we're sending is kind of a little convoluted.
The
And
exit
it could be weeks before you get the records.
The exit reason would exist, but there would still be a last school of record issue, yes.
So if you enroll them, school B, you get him no matter what.
Yes.
The only time you don't with this change is if you wait and don't enroll him.
Yes,
then he
and
goes
that's
back
the
to
current rule. That is the current rule.
Well, then it doesn't matter if they're expelled or not, really.
You ask for records.
I mean, you ask for records, whatever reason. If he doesn't show up, if you don't enroll him until you get records, it really doesn't matter.
Still not gonna help.
School A is going to get him whether he's expelled or not.
But that's why, I mean, that's the status quo.
Mhm.
You know, which gets back to.
No, the status quo is if you have a request for records, I think, and you can correct me, Jennifer, if one of the things, if a student withdrew or left your school system for some reason, and you had a request for records from another school, then that other school, I mean, it didn't count as your dropout, is that correct?
No, the
Well,
current policy.
Records was part of the documentation that we needed.
The current policy is that the dropout is assigned to the last school of record, period.
Okay.
The current policy. This policy, there have been occasions during data certification when a district said to us, we have a request for records from this other parish. They tell us that they enrolled them, but when we can't find that official enrollment in the student information system, school A keeps that dropout
But if you had the
flag.
request for records from an out-of-state school or not
That's
public,
correct.
then you accept it.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Is there any opposition to this motion?
Against my better judgment, I'm going to have to rest it. I've got my fellow superintendents say go with it, but I can't.
Okay. Dr. Jones opposes. Is there any other opposition? Okay. Motion carries. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 45, item 7.2, consideration of the revisions to Bulletin 118, statewide assessment standards and practices related to test security. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent.
Is there a motion to approve as a notice of intent? Thank you, Mr. Rock. Is there a second? Thank you, Dr. Thomason. Do we have any comment cards? Yes. Superintendent White?
Thank you. Members, you'll recall that about 6 months ago, we commissioned an external validating group called Cavion to do a review of Louisiana's test security procedures and practices. That was an audit that resulted in a series of recommendations, and we are proposing that you adopt the recommendations from the independent Cavion report. None of these are radical changes, but they are changes in day-to-day practice of administering assessments that I think will be helpful in assuring that the results of our state tests are as valid as possible. First, there is a statement of assurance that is required today. We're proposing some adjustments to that statement of assurance. There are criteria for who is assigned to be a test administrator, and a number of folks who are assigned to be a test administrator in a given setting. That is being proposed for amendment. We currently have policies regarding cell phones and other electronic devices. That is proposed for change. And there are a couple of other elements of change within the bulletin that do not have to do with the Cavion report. Specifically, those make mention of past tests and thus are technical changes to be deleted from this bulletin. We do have staff on hand to answer questions related to this, and if I can do so as well, I welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 comment cards. Eva Kemp is supporting this recommendation, but she does not wish to speak. Mr. Brian Lejeune and Mr. Scott Richard.
Morning, everybody. Brian Lejeune with the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents. My card is from information only. Just so that you have a frame of reference here, there are a lot of things that are part of the testing protocol that we as school systems are required to do. Give you an example. For EOC testing, an English 2 teacher cannot test her own students. We have to switch those students out with teachers and change how we test because a different teacher has to monitor that testing on an online type of testing situation. Number 2, the assignment to the extent practical is a great verbiage there, but I just want it to be on the record and for people to be made aware that there will be schools that it will not be practical to be able to have 2 people monitoring every test that is given as we go through this process. I have pre-K through 12 schools. We're going to give paper tests in grades 3 and 4 and online tests in 5 through 8. And we have worked really hard and have a great testing opportunity in Jeff Davis Parish that many people don't, and we can make that happen, but having 2 people in every testing where practical is going to be difficult. And for some schools, it may not happen. And I just don't want that to be taken to the point where if a testing person comes in to monitor us and it's not practical, that we get gigged for not having those people to monitor that. And because it does say if practical, but I am concerned because it is very difficult. Right now, we have to do many of these things, and if we extend it to all testing, it's going to be really difficult and not practical. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Richard?
Good morning, Scott Richard with the School Boards Association. We certainly appreciate bringing in Cavion, an outside expert, to analyze our testing protocol in Louisiana, but from a very practical perspective, as a former administrator and teacher, the way the policy revisions, the process at BESE, is somewhat in need of reversal, in our opinion, simply because a fiscal impact study of what would seem to be a very minor change in bulletin and policy can have a fiscal impact on local districts. If you haven't visited a high school during EOC testing windows, I would encourage you to do so as state board members. It really presents challenges at many of our schools and school districts across the state, even to the point where retirees are hired to come back and assist with the testing protocol, especially since the new revision went in earlier to the bulletin not too long ago that a different teacher administer the testing to their class. Now, in a somewhat nebulous legalese wording, we're asking to the extent practicable. That is an undefined term as far as legal liability. School districts don't have finances available to litigate what the extent practicable means. Requiring two teachers to administer one test does present some concerns. And while, again, I started with the comment that we appreciate bringing in an outside private firm to evaluate our testing protocol, I don't recall if this item went to the Superintendent's Advisory Council. I don't recall if this item was vetted and input was received from the experts at the local level who have to make sure policies are implemented with fidelity. The penalties in the law are very severe for any test irregularities. This is a fundamental shift for local school districts at a time when we've received about $24 million less in state funding for this fiscal year. Therefore, at some point in time, we would hope to have, number one, a discussion about a fiscal impact analysis of these type policy changes prior to you voting to adopt them, and then a fiscal impact study is done through the APA process after the fact. We'd like to see that done ahead of your adoption so you can make an informed decision as BESE members. And number two, if this hasn't gone before the Superintendent's Advisory Council, which I don't think it has, and I stand corrected if it has, and we missed it, would suggest that this item be presented to the Superintendent's Advisory Council for input. Thank you.
Dr. Jones?
I'd like to offer a substitute motion to defer this till the next BESE meeting and to refer it to the Superintendent's Advisory Council.
So that was a motion by Dr. Jones, second by Ms. Edmondson. Did you get it? Okay. Is there any other discussion?
Yeah, I'm a little conflicted with this. I understand the need for test security, and I know the importance of these tests, especially, when you're looking at EOC at the high school level. What Mr. Lejeune said is definitely true. If you have nothing better to do in a 3-week window each semester when EOC is taking place at the high school level, you're looking at, for a very large high school in particular, where you're trying to test 6 subjects and you're running kids through computer labs in order to get a testing center for them. You are, for that whole 3-week period, disrupting all the classes that normally use the computer labs, primarily your CAD classes, your business classes. All of your other classes are finding alternate things to do while the labs are taken up for, I guess, a whole 3-week period each semester. And then if we're looking at, and I realize we have the extent practicable, but you're taking that coupled with your own teacher can't be one of them, so you're taking 2 adults out of other classes and putting them into a class to monitor the test, and taking the teachers whose class it is and making them pretty well substitute someone else's class. So you've got major disruption on your campuses. Now, I don't have a solution to this. I understand this is best practices. I understand the need for security. But as we continue to put layer after layer of these restrictions on there, it really takes away from the teaching and learning time on the entire campus for a significant amount of time while this testing takes place. So if I like the idea to defer to the next meeting. I don't see anything that's really vital in this, and maybe get some suggestions from the superintendents to see if they can come up with something that could be somewhat of a compromise, or somewhat maybe a more practical solution to this in some way, and ask that our department staff be present there who deal with the test security, and realizing that it does say extend practicable, but usually when we write these things in there, the implication is best practices is that you do it. And if there is an irregularity, why in the world did you commit more staff to it? So I would be in favor of the motion just to send it to the superintendents. If we haven't done that already, to be honest, have we?
It was on the task force agenda last time, and then the task force agenda got taken up. If we want to delay it, we can delay it. I mean, it'll result in some later guidance, but
I mean, will it be anything?
That's what the board wants.
Is it going to be a problem to delay it till December? I mean, is that going to be a big issue?
Till November. Let's deal with it in November.
Okay. So it's not going to significantly change the outcome?
Not to my knowledge. No.
Okay. Holly?
Did you say there was a cost to this?
Is there? There could be.
Could be.
Could be.
Is there a cost, John?
Well, the language to the extent practicable was put in so the districts can determine whether or not they can do it. If they can't do it, they can't do it. But look, I'm not going to argue about whether or not we want it. If we want to go take it to the Superintendent's Advisory Council, that's fine. Obviously, we were willing to do that because we had it on the task force agenda. We briefed Brian, we briefed Scott, we briefed you, Ms. Voce.
But it's not mandatory.
It's not mandatory, no.
There's not a superintendent in this state that would want to jeopardize testing security by not making all efforts to have 2 individuals in the classroom if it gets promulgated into rule. And that's why I raised the issue about, at some point in time, respectfully requesting that there be some type of outreach to local districts to determine a true fiscal impact of these type policies prior to you all being presented with the policies. Because as we sit today, there's a lot of unknowns as to how this impacts a local school district, especially our larger districts with limited staff to administer testing protocols.
No. Here's what what I would say is this. You have a decision to make. It's not a particular consequence, I don't think, one way or the other. There is an optional proposal that districts can or cannot do. It reflects best practice from a nationally independent auditor. We had it on the agenda. It didn't get done. There are testing cycles coming up, so we decided to move ahead. We briefed the 3 people that I mentioned earlier. So, if you don't do it today, I think Ms. Voce is right. We can do it another time. It is not, however, a mandate. It's an optional thing. And, it's just something that's important. I think it's important that the board revise policies on testing security. I know everybody here thinks that's important, too. So let's do whatever you think is best.
And
Dr. Wilkie?
Just to answer Ms. Holloway's question, if you choose to do it, it will be an added cost because you don't have additional staff just sitting around like waiting for an assignment. You're going to have to pull the other people from somewhere, or you're going to have to hire someone to cover their primary responsibilities when you pull them, or you have to train other people to come in and do it. Now, if you choose not to do it, there will be no fiscal impact.
Dr. Jones?
But the real issue here is recommendation number 1, that LDE is going to audit those local test security issues. And if there's an audit involved, who determines whether it was practical or not? Is it the local superintendent or the person conducting the audit from the Department of Education? I think that's part of the concerns that the superintendents have, and that's why I think there should be some discussion from the Superintendent's Advisory Council.
I just want to say, for my 2 cents on this thing, that we've said over and over again, we read it, to the extent practicable, and with all due respect, and Ms. Richard, I recognize what you said a while ago, no superintendent wants to jeopardize this, but you also said if it's turned into and promulgated into a rule. I think this is a good discussion for at that point, we're discussing making that a rule, but as it reads right now, again, there is no cost if you do not. It says very clearly to the extent practicable. I think that's the basic reading of that. Should this move further, then I think all discussions should be had to make sure that we're not catching anyone. I can't imagine that the board's or the Department of Education's idea here is to catch on such an ambiguous statement. Anyway, I don't see the need in deferring this when it's read right here, to the extent practicable, what we keep saying over and over again.
Thank you. So the motion that we have on the floor now is to refer this to the Superintendent's Advisory Council and defer this to December, item to December. Is there any objection to that motion?
I object.
We have 2 object, but motion still passes, right? Yes. Yeah. All right. What's our next item?
Your next item is on page 50, item 8.1, consideration of the summary report regarding the public hearing held September 29, 2016, and response to the public hearing. This item will be taken in 2 motions. The first motion, the department recommendation is to receive the report, ratify the submission of the report to the Legislative Oversight Committee, rescind the action taken in August 2016 regarding revisions to Bulletin 1922, Section 311, and to direct BESE staff to proceed with the final adoption of Bulletin 1922 with the exception of Section 311. The department recommendation for the second motion is to approve as notice of intent consideration of revisions to Bulletin 1922 in response to the public hearing.
Is there a motion to that effect? I won't make you repeat it. Okay, motion by Mr. Garvey and a second by Dr. Jones. Okay, discussion? First, do we have comment cards? Okay. So the first person is Elizabeth Chapman. She does not wish to speak, and she supports the recommendation. I'd like to call up Ms. Karen Artis, Ms. Lee Barrios, Ms. Ashley McReynolds, Ms. Doris Heckert, Mr. Sean Fleming. I might have said too many. Yeah. Mr. Fleming, you can come to the front, but we'll take you after the first set.
Dr.
And
Boffey.
then Ms. Vaughn, if you'd also like to come to the front, please.
Dr. Boffey.
Yes.
Can we have that long motion reread, please?
Yes. Would you like for it to be reread, or would you like for someone just to tell you what it means?
Yeah, that would be good too.
Okay.
On page 50
Yeah.
in the exec rec, the first
Is
1
everything
through
under
4.
number 1?
Yes.
Okay.
Under A, 1 through 4, and
Yeah,
then B
okay.
is number 5.
Okay, that's what I thought.
We had pulled, this was all of the stuff from the public hearing, and
Right.
they pulled that bulletin out, did some revisions, so we have to take that separately because it's a notice of intent.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Artis? Yes.
Hi, I'd like Doris to start, and then I'm going to follow up with her. That's
Okay.
fine. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Doris Heckard. I'm a parent here in Baton Rouge. I'd like to think, I have some handouts that I'd like passed out. Federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, requires the Louisiana Department of Education, LDOE, to monitor local school systems to ensure students with disabilities are provided a free and appropriate public education, FAPE. Every year, the LDOE submits the USDOE the IDEA plan and budget with certain assurances. Without adequate monitoring of school systems, it is not clear how the LDOE can make these assurances. For the past 5 years, the LDOE has failed to follow the rules established in Bulletin 1922. Specifically, in violation of these rules, LDOE has prevented stakeholders' input into decision-making regarding monitoring by not holding meetings of the Continuous Improvement Monitoring Panel Steering Committee, SIMP, for at least 3 years, completely stopped conducting on-site monitoring for 3 years, and has not included parents as members of the monitoring team for the past 5 years. In a deposition on March 13, 2013, regarding a lawsuit that was filed against LDOE, which is in your handout, has violations to students with disabilities, then Assistant Superintendent Stephen Osborne for student programs at the LDOE testified the decision to stop on-site monitoring was made at the executive level. It appears that LDOE executive team made decisions and continues to make decisions regarding monitoring practice regardless of what the law requires them to do. When drastic changes to Bulletin 1922 were presented to the Special Education Advisory Panel meeting on May 12, 2016, parents and other stakeholders had major concerns. These concerns include the LDOE recommending these changes to Bulletin 1922 to align with their current practices. In the PowerPoint from the May 12 seat meeting on the LDOE website, on slide 16, it indicates that LDOE is proposing changes to Bulletin 1922 to align it with their current practices. At the June 21st, 2016 BESE meeting, Superintendent White claimed the reason LDOE is proposing changes to Bulletin 1922 was to conform with the practices led by the department. Parents have been denied access to information necessary to provide authentic stakeholder input into decisions regarding the monitoring process. At the SEAT meeting on May 12th, LDOE was requesting SEAT to consider the methodology for determining which level of monitoring each school system would receive and changes to Bulletin 1922. The problem is the information provided to SEAT members was inadequate, and for members to fully understand the monitoring selection methodology, and only a description of the proposed changes to Bulletin 1922, not the actual proposed language, was presented to LDOE. Furthermore, none of the information presented to SEAT was made publicly available, even though advocates at the SEAT meeting explicitly requested this information. Even with the limited information provided to them, parents on SEAT began to raise concerns over the proposed changes.
Please identify yourself.
I'm Karen Artis from St. Tammany Parish, and I'm going to finish reading where Doris left. Proposed changes to Bulletin 1922 remove parents from the monitoring process, both removing the CHIMP steering committee and stakeholder group changes with overseeing, monitoring, and removing parents as members of the teams conducting on-site monitoring. Every parent and self-advocate on SEEP objected to the proposed changes. Parents expressed a desire to have access to monitoring reports and corrective, you can see your handouts, and corrective action plans to districts. It seems reasonable to have information indicating systematic issues identified in school systems and plans to address those issues made publicly available and easily accessible to parents. Historically, prior to the LDOE decision to not follow the monitoring laws in 2012, these reports were made available. These reports were produced and available for public viewing on LDOE's website. At the last SEEP meeting this past Wednesday, October 5th, when parents on SEEP requested access to these reports and plans, the LDOE indicated those documents were not available because of privacy laws, the same law being used as the reason that parents no longer be able to be members on the on-site monitoring teams. According to the LDOE interpretation of the privacy law, not only will parents not be able to access these reports, but people at the schools responsible for implementing the changes needed to bring the school systems into compliance will not have access to the monitoring reports or corrective action plans either. These reports were published on the LDOE's website. It is clear the LDOE once knew how to report these, to write reports that presented systematic issues without identifiable individual students, and it is believed that the LDOE can relearn this skill. September 29th, at the hearing, several parents provided testimony urging BESE to reconsider the proposed changes to the bulletin, reconvene CHIMP steering committee, and ensure the parents are included as members of the monitoring team when on-site monitoring is conducted. And we thank Kathy Edmondson being there to hear those parents' concerns. At the SEEP meeting this past Wednesday, the LDOE made clear their intention is to remove parents from being able to participate as members of the monitoring team, and that there is no plan to reconvene the CHIMP. Parents again expressed this disapproval for this proposal. As indicated, the state also refuses to consider parents' requests for information related to findings or corrective actions from monitoring. Parents are requesting, 1, a diverse group of stakeholders, including an adequate representation of parents, be allowed to provide feedback and input on how school systems will be selected for varying levels of monitoring. 2,
Ms. Artis, please come to a close.
Finished? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Sean? Lemon?
Yeah, Ashley had to leave to bring her son to a doctor. I'm Sean Fleming. I'm the Deputy Director of the Developmental Disabilities Council. The group that sent the letter requesting the hearing, we do appreciate y'all having the hearing. I don't know if y'all had the opportunity to listen to it, because the summary, I don't think, did justice to what was presented in the hearing. I found it interesting, and basically what the council is asking is that parents be involved in monitoring in 2 ways. On the front end as stakeholders, to decide which schools have more intensive monitoring. They don't feel that they were involved adequately in that process. They do not feel that they received adequate information into that process. I'll go into that a little bit later. The second thing is that every parent I've spoke to says they are more comfortable speaking to a parent. When there is a focus group at the on-site monitoring, it used to be conducted by parents. That is not accessing information in student records. It is parents willingly sharing their information with another parent, which they can choose to disclose or not to disclose at their leisure. On the front end of monitoring, there were a lot of concerns, but there was actually more confusion than there were concerns about how were we determining a school system would be monitored. And in June, when y'all heard about monitoring, a lot of special ed directors came up and said, we support the changes. We like how it's being done. And then they went back to their districts and they received a report that said, this is how the scores are going to pan out in your district. And the score said, if you had no dropouts for 2 years in a row, you don't get any points. The way you get points on the dropout scale is you have to get kids to drop out. And then the next year they don't drop out, then you get points. And that doesn't really sound too logical. I think that would have been caught if this was properly vetted, but it wasn't. To the department's credit, they said, you know, we're going to give you points. We're not going to penalize you for having perfect dropout rates. But, you know, in Bulletin 1922, Section 101B, the last sentence in it says, any changes to this process shall be presented to the Special Education Advisory Panel. That still has to be done, yet to be done. But the real point is parents were left out on the front end. On the back end, what's being used is student privacy. You have in your hands monitoring reports from years gone by and corrective action reports, plans from school systems that do not contain any student identifying information. And when parents, again at SEEP, ask, can we just have information on what y'all are finding? What I should be able to look at in my district that y'all think is an issue that I should be aware of as a stakeholder? They were told no. Because that information would violate the student's privacy. And you need to really understand what that means. If that's what the department's position is, then no one other than the people who wrote these reports, and maybe a superintendent or special education director, can actually see the reports, which really restricts who can write the corrective action plan. But the corrective action plan itself would be restricted, apparently. It's not publicly available. So the people who are responsible for implementing the changes, the people at the school, the principals at a middle school, can't see the information, apparently, that came from a high school. So they would not be able to see the report nor the corrective action plan if you follow through its conclusion, the logic that I'm hearing from the department. Parents want information to be stakeholders. They continuously request information in order to be stakeholders, and they continuously are denied that information under the guise of student privacy. I really request that y'all look at your, not only the bulletin, but the practices of what's going on that is preventing parents from being authentic stakeholders, preventing them from having access to information to understand what is about to be done and what has been done related to their children in schools. Thank you.
Ms. Barrios?
Lee Barrios, retired teacher, St. Tammany. I also wanted to specifically address the illogical and incorrect use of Act 837 for some reason to limit the accessibility and the participation of parents in this important monitoring process. The bulletin suggested change would say, instead of the parent team member, it would say individuals authorized by the LDE will conduct a parent focus group meeting. At the last SEEP meeting, they never did really reach consensus about who were the authorized representatives of LDE that would be available. However, it did appear to come down to approximately 5 people in the LDE that were authorized. That is in no way, shape, or form sufficient. Not only that, but those, at least some of those authorized individuals are not trained, special education, certified, never have been teachers, and certainly don't have the insight that parents do. The specific item in question is, according to the report of the public comments, it says, historically, the on-site monitoring team's parent team member has facilitated a parent focus group meeting that's purely voluntary. It is not. Act 837 says, for purposes of this section, personally identifiable information is defined as information about an individual that can be used on its own or with other information to identify, contact, or locate an individual. That's ridiculous because These people are offering themselves up. They're members of a focus group meeting. There's no reason why parents can't facilitate that. And certainly the facilitator has more control over the direction and the openness of a meeting. So it's very important that they continue to have that ability. And that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Miss Susan Vaughn. No, ma'am. We have a systems where people can watch online. So make sure that your mic's on and identify yourself. Thank you very much.
Susan Vaughn, Director of Special Education in Central Parish, and I serve on the Seed Advisory Panel for the Louisiana Association of Special Administrators of the state. Just a couple of things.
I thought it was green, sorry. A couple of things I want to just clarify. Even though the stakeholder group was not called SIMP as it was in the past, LDOE did form a steering committee when they began to revise the monitoring process and Bulletin 1922, and it was a diverse group. There were directors of special ed on the group, there were parents on the group, there were community members, and I think there was a university person that was also on that committee. So there was a group of people that vetted the process to move forward into the changes into Bulletin 1922. So as far as the parent input, I want to go on record, parents are very, very important in the students' education and the process for monitoring. The directors like this monitoring process in that everybody's monitored every year. In the old process, a third of the districts around were monitored. We were in population groups, and if you had the lowest scores in that group, you were chosen. Now every district will get some form of monitoring. We're on a risk scale. If you're the lowest risk, then you may just have a self-assessment to do. Otherwise, you may have a desk monitoring, or if there are real issues that have surfaced in this process, then you will have an on-site visit. And during that on-site visit is where the state has recommended parent forums. In the past, the parent ran that forum. The concern did come up about the privacy law, and I think LDOE consulted with the attorney, and they said it would be best if the parent forum be run by authorized people at the State Department. Being in special ed for a long time, I know my parents, if they have a concern, they're going to speak to me and anybody else who will listen to them if there's an issue going on in the district. I encourage my parents to be forthright and let us know if there's issues. We can't fix them if we don't know about them. So even though the state is running this parent forum, I think the parents that have concerns with their child's education will come forward and present those to that parent forum committee. I wasn't sure about the, I thought this comment was made that districts did not have copies of the findings from the monitoring or the corrective action report, but the district works with LDOE after the monitoring process. They come forward, meet with the superintendent and the special ed leaders in the district and talk about their findings, and then together we develop a corrective action plan on how to move forward and correct the instances of noncompliance. So as a whole, LaCia does support this changes in Bulletin 1922, and yes, there was a glitch with the dropout, but it's a new program and the State Department was very responsive in correcting those issues. Thank you.
Dr. Bobby, I have a question for Susan before she gets away. She's going to try to get away quickly. Susan, was there, it's been a long, long time ago, but was there never a forum or a meeting or something where there was a state person and a parent person kind of together? Do you know what I'm talking about? Did I dream that?
The parent focus groups with the old monitoring process, it was mostly, the State Department personnel was organizing it, but the parent ran the focus
Right,
groups.
yeah, okay.
But they're concerned now, and I know parents can give permission for it, but we're having an issue right now, and this is different. But just to give parents access to other parents whose child is special
Right.
ed, we should not be giving them those names.
Right. Thank you.
Members, before we go into discussion among the board members, I just want to pause for a second and recognize Jim Henderson. I understand he's the newly appointed president of the University of Louisiana system, and he is visiting us here today. So, congratulations. We appreciate your service. Board members, do you have other questions about this particular policy? No? Okay. Yes, Ms. Boche?
Could I ask Ms. Vaughn to come back up, please? Is she still there? Yeah. And Ms. Vaughn is one of our best special education directors in the state from Ascension Parish and very well respected.
I don't like to be in the center of attention, though.
No, and I don't mean to put you on the spot. And I know there were two, at least from what I heard, two issues raised. One about stakeholder or parent input to decide which schools needed more intensive monitoring and such, or districts. And you were saying that the committee that was formed did have parent representation on
Yes,
that
ma'am.
committee. And did it have representation from the groups maybe that spoke a little bit earlier from the parent component?
I know there were at least 2 parents on the committee. It was a relatively, like 12 people. I know Dr. Mooney from the university was on there. It may have been more than 2 parents, but I don't know exactly where they were from or what agencies they represented.
And I think, I like what you said, that every district has some form of monitoring. It may be a self-assessment, a self-reflection, if the scores are high on that risk assessment or very good on that risk assessment, to the on-site monitoring. These parent focus groups, I mean, there's nothing that's going to stop interested parents from attending. And even though it may be led by a department staff member, in the old procedure, did that department staff member leave the room and it was just parents led by a parent? Or did the department staff member stay in the room and listen as well?
I honestly don't remember. I know no district personnel could be in the room.
Okay.
So the parents felt free to talk to someone else. I don't think, I mean, the state is tasked with compliance. I mean, that is their main role in this monitoring process. So I think they're going to encourage parents, if there are issues, please let us know about it. We can't fix them if we don't know what they are.
And, you know, while I too want to make sure that parents are intricately involved in the process, and my experience in my own district, parents are not shy about talking about what their problems are, whether it be in front of other parents or in front of district staff or anyone who will listen, as well as the department. I guess what I'm saying on this measure, if our legal people at this point have taken the position that this is probably something that can't be done, letting the parent lead it because of the personally identifiable information, I guess I would have to go along with that and hope that, and if there is an objection to that, then there are other avenues maybe that we can look at to see or to get some type of an opinion on that. I do trust Ms. Vaughn that there was a great deal of input into the proposed revisions to this policy. So I guess that's all I wanted to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Garvey.
I have a couple questions for Ms. Vaughn. Are you hearing complaints from the Ascension parents about these changes?
About the monitoring, no. We do, and all the districts do a self-monitoring process because that's in Bulletin 1706, and we hold parent forums and focus groups as well as parent interviews in our self-monitoring process. So our parents are used to that. So when the state came in to monitor before, we had a parent, they did a lot of phone interviews and things, and, you know, so I'm not getting any concerns in my district about it.
You described earlier that some districts, they'll be judged beforehand and some will receive a higher level of investigation, you might say. If a parent has a problem with a particular school and brings that to the department's attention, does that elevate that school on that list of which schools will receive a higher level of investigation?
Well, the monitoring...
Can the parent affect a school's investigation in that way?
When we do, like inside the district, when we do self-monitoring, we talk to a parent, our parents, and if they've come forward with something that's issued, then we look at the compliance, and if that is a compliance issue at that school, then the school is cited on it.
What about at the state level?
At the state level, the whole monitoring process is set up on data. It's data-based on risk ratios, depending on what your dropout rate is, what your high school diploma rate is. They look at their discipline. It's a whole new process, so I'm trying to think. They look at LRE, least restrictive environment. Are your children receiving their education in the least restrictive environment they can? So there are about 5 or 6. This year they're adding transition, I think, and also preschool settings. So in each of those areas there are compliance issues, and so you're judged on each of those and then ranked accordingly.
But you're not judged on parental complaints?
There's not a section for that unless there is a complaint department at the state, so I'm not sure how they would roll that piece into that.
Can I?
Maybe we need to roll.
Can I? Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, if you
following.
don't mind, respectfully, you're doing a marvelous job, Susan. Thank you. She's so well versed on that. But could we possibly ask Angela to answer some of these questions, John? To assist Susan?
Yeah, sure. Why don't we have Angela and Jamie come to the front, and if members have questions about monitoring, they're welcome to ask.
Good job, Susan.
I was going to leave, but y'all going to call
No,
me back.
don't leave. You're good.
So I'm sitting here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Garvey.
Yes, I guess the question would be, does the level of complaints from parents affect whether a school gets into the higher category of investigation from the state?
So what Susan just described is our risk-based monitoring process, but outside of our risk-based monitoring process, we work with the Office of Legal Counsel where all formal complaints are actually reported to the state, and we have a random category of monitoring whereby if there are complaints that are received, we reserve the right to schedule a random monitoring visit at any time. So that would be outside of the risk-based process.
So if you get a lot of parental complaints about a particular school, is it more likely to get a higher level of investigation?
If there are numerous complaints from a parent or from a school district, you'll likely get an on-site monitoring, which is the most intense form of monitoring.
Is that it?
Dr. Bobby, I have a question.
Yes.
In the past, Susan, you said there was a process to be able to have, if a parent has a complaint. We used to have pretty obvious in a lot of places an 800 number where that could happen. My question is to the superintendent, do we still have that? We still have I know people can get their way at some point to someone when they have a complaint, but you know what I'm saying? We used to have Susan, help me out here. We used to have an 800 number where we would give parents, if there were complaints that weren't satisfied at the district level, that could go to the state.
We've routed, for reasons of efficiency, every call through a call center. I believe that if there were that kind of concern, and we do get those kinds of concerns, probably on this issue more than any other issue, I think it's fair to say, other than early childhood issues, we probably get special education issues coming through the call center more than any other. But it's not a specific special education hotline. And then it's routed to special education staff.
But parents still access that because if they call and they want to complain above me and the superintendent, I give them the number to the state, and if they say what they're calling about, they route them to someone in special ed to take their concern.
I work for you. I know how it works there. But I just wonder if, statewide, if it's working like that. So, just something to consider. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Garvey.
These changes are changes by definition, and everybody, or most people, gets uneasy whenever something is changed. If a year from now we find out that this is not working, we can readdress it, I would imagine. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, board members, we have exhausted our public comment cards, and I think some of our board members as well. Is there any objection to this motion? Hearing none, motion passes. that concludes this meeting. Dr. Jones, we await instructions from you on how we're going to proceed with our day.
Come back tomorrow. No, we'll take a 10-minute break.
The School Innovation and Turnaround Committee meeting will begin at 12:05. There are only 2 items on that agenda. We will adjourn for lunch following that, so if we can all be back at 12:05, thank you. If you are here for a records review, please check in with Ms. Davis or myself. Thank you.